Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is the place where we take stacks of technical sources, dense research, and sometimes, let's be honest, the darker corners of human psychology, and really distill them down into the knowledge you need.
And today, we're definitely charting a course right into those darker corners. Our mission is to do a full analysis of the Dark Triad.
Okay, the Dark Triad. I think a lot of people have heard the term, but let's unpack it right away. We're talking about a concept that defines three specific personality traits.
Mm-hmm.
And these aren't necessarily clinical disorders, in the way most people think of them. They're more like deeply offensive character traits that really shape how a person deals with other people.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's a framework, really.
Mm-hmm.
This whole idea was formally introduced by a couple of researchers, Delroy Paulus and Kevin Williams, back in 2002.
Yeah.
And they grouped these three traits. We're talking Machiavellianism, subclinical narcissism, and subclinical psychopathy, because they all share something fundamental. Malevolent qualities.
Yeah.
And a fundamentally callous and manipulative way of dealing with other people.
So these are the people who put themselves first, no matter what. They find ways to exploit others for their own gain, but they can still, walk among us. They hold down jobs, they lead companies, they have relationships.
They function, but like you said, at a cost to absolutely everyone around them.
And that word subclinical is really important here, isn't it?
It's the key. We are not analyzing people who are institutionalized. We're talking about personality dimensions in the general population, in our coworkers, our neighbors, that make people lean toward this kind of manipulative behavior.
So our mission for this deep dive is, I guess, threefold. First, we have to really break down those three traits. We need to get the differences between the narcissist, the Machiavellian, and the psychopath.
Right. And second, we have to look at the real-world impact. I mean, why do these fundamentally negative traits sometimes lead to this sort of startling success, even if it's often very short-lived?
And then finally,
we'll get into the academic debates. Are these three things really separate? Where do they come from, genes or environment? And we'll even look at the conceptual opposite, the so-called light triad.
Okay, so by the end of this, the idea is that you, the listener, will have a kind of blueprint for spotting these different manipulative styles.
Exactly. Knowing their playbook is the shortcut you need to better navigate your social and professional world.
All right, let's start with the basics then. Before we pull them apart, what brings these three powerful negative traits together? What's the common ground?
Well, they absolutely share a deep fundamental DNA. The overlap really comes down to three core things.
Okay.
A pervasive lack of empathy, a general sense of interpersonal hostility, and a tendency toward being offensive or antagonistic.
So basically, they're self-centered. Their own needs, their own goals come before anyone else's feelings, rights, or well-being.
That's the engine. It's an exploitative and opportunistic approach to life.
So if that's the underlying engine, why did Paulus and Williams even bother to separate them? I mean, if they all share that same dark heart, why not just have one big bad guy dimension?
Because the way the darkness shows up, the strategy they use, their impulse control, their motivation, it's all significantly different.
And those differences matter.
They matter for predicting behavior. Let's start with the one most people think they know, the one that's all about image, narcissism.
We use that term so casually, but here in the Dark Triad, we're talking about subclinical narcissism, so a trait that exists on a spectrum in all of us. What are the key characteristics?
It's all about grandiosity, pride, egotism, a feeling of dominance, entitlement, and of course that central lack of empathy we just talked about.
So they truly believe they are superior, special.
Yes, they operate from that belief. And they have this excessive, almost desperate need for admiration and validation from other people. They can seem really charming and confident at first, but it's often masking a very fragile ego underneath.
So they're the people who always need to be in the spotlight. They're constantly boasting, or they find these subtle ways to steer every conversation back to their own achievements.
You've got it. They need that external validation to prop up that massive self-image.
And when researchers look at this through the lens of the Big Five personality model, where does narcissism sit?
Right, the Big Five. So for our listeners, that's the main framework in personality psychology. Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism.
And narcissism correlates with?
It correlates positively with two of them. Extroversion and openness to experience.
That makes perfect sense. Extroversion would fuel that outward confidence, the need to be social and get attention.
Mm.
And I guess openness relates to their feeling of being unique or maybe more willing to take risks to prove how great they are.
Precisely.
Yeah,
But like the other two traits, it also shows a really strong negative correlation with agreeableness.
which reflects that hostility and low compassion.
Exactly.
Mm.
And it also has a pretty significant correlation with psychopathy,
Yeah.
specifically the more aggressive, bold parts of that trait.
So how do you even measure this in the general population? I imagine the clinical diagnosis for narcissistic personality disorder is intense.
Oh, it is. That requires extensive clinical interviews. But for studying grandiose narcissism in a non-clinical setting, which is the focus of the Dark Triad, the standard tool is the Narcissistic Personality Inventory, or NPI.
Yeah.
It's a self-report measure, and it's designed to capture those high-functioning aspects of narcissism,
Yeah.
the drive for power, the exhibitionism, the authority. It lets us study this as a dimension in everyday people.
Okay, let's move on to the second member of the trio, Machiavellianism, or high Mox. The name itself, from Niccolo Machiavelli, suggests a cold, calculating approach to power. Is that it? Is it all political maneuvering?
That is the absolute core of it. Machiavellianism is defined by intense manipulativeness, callousness, and a real indifference to morality. High Max are driven by self-interest, and they see relationships as these sort of zero-sum games where manipulation isn't just okay, it's the key to winning at life.
So they don't just manipulate, they genuinely believe the world requires manipulation to get ahead. They're just unprincipled operators.
That's their worldview. And if we look at their Big Five profile, they are, of course, low on agreeableness, but also notably low on conscientiousness.
That's interesting. Why low conscientiousness?
It reflects their sort of strategic but ultimately lazy approach. They'd rather use deceit and find a shortcut through manipulation than do the diligent hard work.
Now, here's the critical question, and I think it's something people really need to grasp. What separates the calculating high Mach from the third trait, psychopathy? They sound similar.
This is the key distinction, and it's what Paulus fought to maintain. High Machs are calculating, they plan for the long term, they have incredible behavioral control, they're patient.
And psychopaths are not.
Not at all. They're far less impulsive, reckless, and carelessly aggressive than psychopaths. The Machiavellian is the cold strategist, willing to wait years for the right moment. The psychopath wants their gratification now.
That planning suggests a much higher degree of control. And there's a crucial note here about its academic status, too. It's different from the other two.
Yes, that's a great point. Unlike narcissism and psychopathy, which both have corresponding personality disorders in the DSM.
The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders.
Right. Machiavellianism has never been in the DSM. It's treated only as a personality construct within psychology. It gives a slightly different, purely psychological status.
All right, that brings us to the third, and I think arguably the darkest component, psychopathy. This is the one that really gets the most attention.
And for good reason. It's universally considered the most malevolent trait of the triad. It's defined by a cluster of really profound negative attributes: continuous antisocial behavior, extreme impulsivity, deep selfishness, and these defining callous and unemotional traits.
No remorse.
No remorse, and a very shallow affect.
So if the narcissist wants validation and the high Mach wants that slow, strategic win, the psychopath is just driven by pure self-gratification and doesn't care who gets hurt.
That captures the motivation perfectly. They're high in impulsivity, high in thrill-seeking, and they have a real deficiency in experiencing complex emotions like guilt or shame.
Looking at their Big Five profile, I'm guessing low agreeableness again.
Very low agreeableness.
Right.
And crucially, very low conscientiousness. That combination of a lack of basic kindness and a lack of impulse control makes them incredibly volatile.
Measuring psychopathy, even at the subclinical level, that must be a huge challenge.
It is. I mean, historically, the gold standard for clinical assessment was Robert Hare's Psychopathy Checklist Revised, the PCLR.
Right.
But that's an observer-rated tool. It requires tons of training, file reviews, and interview. It's really for forensic populations.
Yeah.
Because, well, asking someone defined by deceit to honestly report on their own callousness is a problem.
Yeah, you can't really rely on the honesty of a person who is defined by their dishonesty.
Exactly. So for researchers studying this in the general population, people who score high on these traits but aren't necessarily criminals, they had to pivot. They moved to self-report tools like the Levinson scales or the Psychopathic Personality Inventory.
Which lets them measure psychopathic attributes on a spectrum.
Precisely. It treats psychopathy as a spectrum, not just a yes or no diagnosis.
Okay, so to sum up part one, we have our trio: The grandiose ego, fueled by status, that's narcissism.
Hmm.
The cold calculator, seeking long-term strategic gain, that's Machiavellianism.
Right.
And the impulsive, remorseless thrill seeker, that's psychopathy. They're distinct, but they're all united by that core lack of empathy and low agreeableness.
You've got it.
So we've laid the groundwork. Now let's get into the most fascinating part. How do these traits actually function in the real world? And let's start with the ultimate battleground for ambition, the workplace.
Right. Organizational psychology has produced a mountain of research on this, and it confirms that scoring high on the Dark Triad is genuinely related to acquiring leadership positions.
And even higher salaries.
Yes, and higher salaries and perceived influence. It feeds directly into that cynical idea that, bad guys get ahead.
But you said earlier that the success is often short-lived. Why is that? How does a trait that pushes someone forward eventually cause them to just crash and burn?
That is the central paradox of the Dark Triad. The very traits that get them noticed are things like superficial charm, assertiveness, dominance. Narcissists, for example, they kill it in interviews because they just project so much confidence.
And the Machiavellians are good at the office politics.
Exactly. They are masters of organizational politics, building these strategic, though very fleeting alliances. These traits open doors. But they lack the essential qualities you need for long-term success.
Like trust, loyalty.
Emotional intelligence, genuine conscientiousness. They gain authority by impressing people, but they lose legitimacy by exploiting them.
So the network of support they need to stay in power just collapses.
It erodes over time. The high turnover of staff who can't stand their callousness, the burned bridges, it all eventually catches up to them.
The sources outline this really powerful blueprint for spotting them based on their unique manipulation tactics. How does each trait try to get what it wants?
Yeah, this is fascinating work. Jonathan and his colleagues identified these unique mechanisms. The Machiavellian, the cold calculator, they rely heavily on excessive charm and flattery.
So they make you feel important, and while you're distracted by the praise, they get you to do their dirty work.
That's the classic playbook. Then you have the narcissist, who's all about image and grandiosity. They tend to use their physical appearance or their perceived status to manipulate people.
So it's about dominance. I'm superior, so you should just do what I say.
Exactly. It's much less subtle than the Machiavellian. And finally, the psychopath, the most aggressive and impulsive one, is uniquely related to using physical threats or intimidation.
And that doesn't have to be actual violence, right? It could be explosive outbursts, creating a fearful atmosphere.
Precisely. They rely on fear, not finesse.
That framework, charm, appearance, or threats is incredibly useful. But beyond just climbing the ladder, what's the long-term toxic cost to the organization?
It's profound. All three traits contribute heavily to things like knowledge sabotage and knowledge hiding.
Knowledge hiding. What's that?
It means actively hoarding critical information, delaying giving details, or even intentionally providing false or misleading information to your coworkers. It starves the organization of collaboration.
That's a highly aggressive act disguised as just being forgetful or incompetent.
It's malicious. And research consistently shows that high Dark Triad bosses negatively affect their subordinates' career success and their well-being. It creates these chronically toxic environments.
And we mentioned narcissists are great at interviews.
Yes, they get more favorable hiring ratings because of their confidence. But that skill rarely translates to better job performance once they're actually hired. They're great at selling themselves, but they often fail to deliver.
Let's transition from the physical office to the digital world. The link between the Dark Triad and, say, internet trolls seems almost obvious, but what does the research actually show?
This is a huge area of modern study. And yes, the research has firmly established that internet trolls score very high on dark personality traits. We see signs of sadism, antisocial behavior, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism.
The anonymity of the internet must be the perfect playground for them.
It is. It allows these low-empathy, hostile styles to thrive without any immediate social consequences.
You mentioned sadism there, which we hinted might be a fourth trait. How does it connect to trolling specifically?
A key study in 2014 pointed out that trolling is often a manifestation of what they called everyday sadism.
Everyday sadism.
Yeah, the tendency to get genuine pleasure from inflicting pain or distress on others. For these high scorers, the emotional distress they cause online is the reward. It gives them a sense of power and enjoyment.
So it's not just about winning an argument. The cruelty itself is the point.
That's the distinction. Now let's get even more specific and look at actual cybercrime. This is where the functional differences between the traits become crystal clear. Their motivation dictates their attack method.
Okay, so let's take the psychopathic cybercriminal.
Right. Their impulsivity and need for a thrill correlates with faster speeds of persistence and exploitation during an attack. They want the immediate rush of the breach. Speed is more important than stealth.
They're the smash and grab artists of the digital world. What about the narcissist? They need to feel dominant.
Narcissism correlates with a different pattern. Faster privilege escalation, persistence, and extraction. They don't just want to break in. They want the highest possible access, the biggest reward, the most sensitive data.
To prove they're the best.
To validate their superiority. And finally, the calculating Machiavellian, the strategist.
I'm guessing they're all about stealth.
Exactly. Machiavellianism correlates primarily with stealth. They are the digital spies. They want to remain undetected for long-term exploitation, installing backdoors, slowly siphoning data. Their goal is sustained, strategic access.
Wow. That level of detail really confirms these traits are functionally distinct. Okay, let's pivot to the final major area where these traits play out, often dramatically: relationships.
Psychologists have looked at this for decades, and the consensus points to what's called an accelerated mating strategy.
Which is an idea from life history theory, right?
It is. It's a framework that looks at how organisms allocate their energy. The Dark Triad uses a fast life strategy, focusing on immediate gains in reproduction, rather than a slow life strategy of stability and long-term investment.
To the quantity over quality, basically.
Precisely. People high in Dark Triad traits report more sex partners, they have very favorable attitudes toward casual sex, and they have significantly lower standards for short-term mates.
They're built for transactional interactions.
They're masters of it. They're also more willing to actively poach mates from other people, since relationships are just seen as a resource to be acquired.
So in terms of their dating patterns, what does that look like?
They gravitate heavily toward relationship types that allow for high turnover and low emotional investment. So one-night stands, hookups, booty calls, friends with benefits.
Right.
Their style of romance is pragmatic and game-playing. They're amazing at the initial seduction. They seem highly desirable. But once the immediate goal is met, that lack of empathy becomes very apparent very quickly.
And what happens if a relationship, against all odds, tries to become long-term or stable?
It rarely works. They are significantly less likely to sustain long-lasting relationships. They report drastically lower relationship satisfaction, and they're far more willing to just end things.
Their opportunism and emotional shallowness just can't sustain a real partnership.
Exactly. The partner eventually burns out or realizes they're just being used. It's a profound demonstration that while these traits are great for short-term acquisition, they're catastrophic for long-term cooperation.
Be it in the office or in the bedroom. Okay. As dynamic as the core three are, the research is always evolving. And this led to the idea of a dark tetrad. What's the proposed fourth trait, and why did academics feel it was necessary?
The proposed fourth trait is sadism. And the argument for including it is that while sadism is highly correlated with the core three, especially psychopathy, it uniquely predicts antisocial behavior above and beyond what the other three can predict.
So what specific behavior does sadism account for that the others don't cover?
Sadism is fundamentally about deriving actual pleasure or enjoyment from cruelty, from inflicting suffering or pain.
Ah, okay.
The distinction is crucial. A psychopath might hurt someone to get their wallet, but they don't necessarily enjoy the pain itself. Sadism distinctively predicts unprovoked aggression, cruelty for its own sake.
So the dark triad is exploitation for gain, but sadism is exploitation for fun.
That's a very concise way to put it. Now let's look at an alternative grouping that kind of flips the script. The vulnerable dark triad, or VDT. This seems almost counterintuitive to the bold, assertive style we've been describing.
Right, we've been talking about these grandiose extroverts. What defines the VDT?
The VDT is made up of vulnerable narcissism, secondary psychopathy, which is often linked to high anxiety and borderline personality traits. Unlike the traditional dark triad, VDT members are characterized by negative emotionality, distrust, and volatility.
And they're more introverted.
Yes, significantly related to introversion and profound emotional disinhibition. So while the traditional dark triad is the outward dominant bully, the VDT is more like the internal, emotionally reactive, fragile antagonist.
And what drives them is different.
Completely. The traditional dark triad is influenced by external factors, how they choose to act to get what they want. The VDT is driven by internal, embedded desires and deep emotional insecurity. Their antagonism comes from anxiety and poor self-regulation, not from a place of bold superiority.
Shifting gears now, we have to talk about the big academic debate here. Are these three traits truly distinct, or are psychologists just naming the same shade of darkness three different ways?
This is the heart of the criticism. It's often summarized by the term jangle fallacy, using different names for what is essentially the same underlying thing.
And the argument is that the theoretical differences just don't show up in the data.
Exactly, especially when you're studying the general population. The overlap is most pronounced between Machiavellianism and psychopathy. In practice, researchers really struggle to find self-report questions that measure pure strategic callousness that don't also capture parts of psychopathy, and vice versa.
So in a college sample, scoring high on a Machiavellianism scale might just be a proxy for measuring subclinical psychopathy.
That's one of the major conclusions some researchers have reached. And we even see this convergence when you look at the clinical gold standard, the PCLR. A lot of the content about manipulation and superficial charm is housed in what's called Factor 1 of that test,
Okay.
which some have even dubbed aggressive narcissism, again showing this massive statistical convergence.
So the distinction Paulus and Williams drew, while it sounds good in theory, might be too subtle for our current measurement tools.
That's the technical challenge. But regardless of that debate, the shared foundation is undisputed. And we see that clearly when we map the triad back onto the Big Five model.
What's the single unifying factor there?
Across hundreds of studies, the strongest single correlate of the entire Dark Triad is consistently low agreeableness.
That makes sense.
It captures the suspicion, the antagonism, the hostility, the coldness that they all share. They are all, at their core, low on the compassion dimension. That low agreeableness is the dark gravitational center.
That really grounds it in a solid scientific model. Okay, so where do these traits come from? Nature or nurture?
The classic question. To answer that, researchers rely on twin studies, which help us parse out the contributions of genetics versus environment.
And what did they find?
All three traits, narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy, have substantial genetic components. A lot of the overlap we see between them is driven by inherited genes.
But are they all equally heritable?
Interestingly, no. Psychopathy and narcissism were found to be statistically more inheritable than Machiavellianism.
Wow. So the impulsive aggression of the psychopath and the grandiose ego of the narcissist are more locked in by DNA, while Machiavellianism might be more malleable.
That's the interpretation. While unique life events, what we call non-shared environmental factors, contribute to all three, Machiavellianism is the only one of the three found to be related to environmental factors that are shared with siblings.
The family environment.
The family environment, exactly.
That's a critical finding. It suggests that Machiavellianism, the cold, calculating part, is the trait most likely to be influenced by your early family dynamics.
Yes. Some researchers think that the strategic, manipulative behavior of a high Mach might be a learned coping mechanism from a difficult family structure, where they learn that deceit and manipulation are necessary tools for survival.
That gives the high Mach this chilling, almost tragic backstory that the impulsive psychopath or the entitled narcissist might lack. It's the learned behavior of a survivor.
That's a powerful idea.
We've spent a lot of time in the dark. Before we wrap up, let's look at the mirror image. Psychologists proposed a corresponding light triad.
This is a vital and, I think, hopeful shift in focus. It was developed by Scott Barry Kaufman and his colleagues to define traits that promote positive interpersonal functioning and genuine cooperation.
So what are the three components of this light side?
They are humanism, Kantianism, and faith in humanity.
Okay, let's break those down. Humanism.
Humanism is about valuing the dignity and self-worth in others, treating them with respect just because they're human.
And Kantianism, named after the philosopher Immanuel Kant.
Yes, and this is the most direct contrast to the Dark Triad's core. Kantianism means seeing other people as ends in themselves, not just as means to an end.
So not using people as tools to get what you want.
Exactly. And the third is faith in humanity. It's just a general, optimistic belief that other people are fundamentally good and trustworthy. A stark contrast to the cynicism of the high Mach.
And what are the real-world outcomes for people who score high on this light triad?
The list is extensive and overwhelmingly positive. They report much higher life satisfaction, more compassion, empathy, self-esteem, a real sense of authenticity.
They sound like great people to be around.
They are. They're intellectually curious, tolerant, they have secure relationships, they have what's often called a quiet ego, confident, but not demanding validation.
It sounds like a blueprint for a fulfilling life. But you mentioned there might be a trade-off, a potential weakness.
This is the interesting twist.
Oh.
While overwhelmingly positive, the light triad traits were found to be uncorrelated with certain characteristics like bravery or assertiveness.
So, while they're compassionate, they might struggle to stand up for themselves or confront injustice.
That's the idea. Their focus on cooperation might mean they lack the competitive edge or the necessary self-assertion to achieve really challenging goals. Their quiet ego might leave them susceptible to being exploited by the very dark triad types we've been talking about.
It suggests that maybe optimal functioning requires a balance, a bit of that assertiveness or grit.
It does seem that way.
This has been a really comprehensive look at the architecture of these offensive personalities. To quickly synthesize, the Dark Triad is 3 distinct but overlapping traits: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy, all united by that profound lack of agreeableness.
We saw how their motivations dictate their strategies, leading to these real but usually short-lived advantages in leadership and mating. And we touched on the critical academic debate, the jangle fallacy, but affirmed that low agreeableness is that undisputed gravitational center.
We also found that genes play a strong role, but Machiavellianism seems to be the one most shaped by environment, possibly learned in difficult family situations. And finally, we contrasted all this darkness with the hopeful but maybe not so assertive light triad.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We have to connect this to another model of personality, the Exixoco model, which includes a 6th factor: honesty, humility.
Okay.
The Dark Triad is profoundly and strongly negatively correlated with sincerity, fairness, modesty, and avoiding greed. The take-home message is that any benefits from these traits, the job, the partners, are conferred only on the person with the traits, not on society, not on the people around them.
It's the ultimate selfish zero-sum strategy.
Correct. So knowing this blueprint is your critical shortcut. When you're dealing with difficult people, you now have the tools to analyze their manipulative mechanism. Is this person using excessive charm and flattery to get their way? That's likely Machiavellianism.
Are they relying on their physical appearance or their status to dominate the room?
That's narcissism.
Or are they defaulting to physical threats, intimidation, or just explosive volatility to get compliance?
That's the psychopath's playbook. Understanding which dark style you're facing is the essential knowledge you need to predict and manage the self-interested behaviors of those around you.
Knowledge is power, especially when you're navigating the darker corners of human nature. You now know the difference between the cold calculator, the entitled ego, and the thrill seeker.